Welcome to Gospel Life Church. We are so glad you're here. Before we hear a message from one of our pastors, there are a couple things we want to show you. From the online services site, if you click the Connect button, it will take you to a page that has ways for you to communicate with us. Any guest that fills out this connection card will receive a $5 gift card, and Gospel Life will give a donation to help families who've been affected by COVID-19. Next, if you click on the Help button, it will take you to a page where you can either request help or find out how you can give help. On the page, there's a button you click if someone you know or if you yourself need help during this time. Below, there are 3 ways you can help local families, whether it's through donating money, giving gift cards, or by volunteering to run errands. If you click this, it will take you to our donate page. And if you select benevolence, 100% of what's given will go directly to help local families that have been affected by COVID-19. We hope that you enjoy our service today.
The reading for this morning is Mark 15:33 to 16:3. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, Behold, he is calling Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, Surely this man was the Son of God. There were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him. And there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died. And summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices, so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. So glad that you've joined us here on this Easter Sunday. Thank you for taking a time to meet with us here at Gospel Life Church. I'm Chase. I'm the lead pastor here with Gospel Life Church, and so I'm so glad that you've joined us. And you know what? I'm looking forward to just sharing the word with you this morning. I'm looking forward to kind of diving into this a part of the Easter story, and looking forward to even next week as we conclude these things. But you know, before we begin, you know, this whole quarantine thing. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it. And specifically, you know, I've been scouring the internet a little bit to find some just incredible memes in regards to quarantine. You know, it's important for us to laugh at moments like this. I'm going stir crazy. I don't know if you're there in that moment. Maybe you're enjoying this a little more than myself because maybe you're a little more introverted, whatever the case may be. But for me, I just needed to laugh this week. And so I started looking through some different places where I could find just opportunities to just laugh a little bit. And so I have a couple here on the screen. You'll see the first one is by far one of my favorite movies, called Princess Bride. And on it is Andre the Giant. And if for nothing else, if you haven't seen this movie, watch it for Andre the Giant. But it's just an incredible story, and it's got Fred Savage in it. I mean, it's fantastic. Anyways, Princess Bride here, and it's just, I love what it talks about. And it's almost like prediction, right, of our future, when he talks about how every person will need these one day, right? And so it just gave me a little chuckle this morning. Another one is it hits a little too close to home. It's almost a little offensive, but we kind of like that right now, right? And so don't you love this? Like the whole Popeyes, Chick-fil-A thing. I know it's kind of like, this specific meme is kind of giving it a little bit of a resurgence. It seems like that was ages ago, right? Where we're talking about what's better, Popeyes or Chick-fil-A, and here we are. You know, it feels like that's been years ago, but it was just a few months ago that we were debating this, and now here we have this, and I love it. You know, hey, shots fired from the Chick-fil-A camp, right, towards Popeyes, but yeah, it's a little bit offensive, right? This next one here was probably one of my favorites, just because it's so accurate, right? Like when I used to think about, I love apocalyptic type shows and movies, and just thinking about that, it's kind of fun to think about what could be if things were to go poorly for us. And so to think about, and isn't it just interesting to think about who you think you would be in the apocalypse, and then let's be honest, this is a little bit apocalyptic, and look where we're at, right? Like let's be real about this. Like this is us, sweatpants, again, bowl of cereal, just doing our thing. And I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous. But this last one, though, is probably my favorite. And it's kind of a two-parter here. But I mean, isn't this interesting? Like the idea of like certain people, you say, hey, we're all in this together. Yes, we are. And, they're sitting there in their lap of luxury on a yacht, and you're hanging out on your little, whatever the heck kind of boat that is. I'm sure it has a name, which I do not know. But I mean, it's so accurate to our situation. Anyways, love this stuff. But hey, it is seriously just good to just kind of chuckle with you a little bit. Hopefully you at least gave it a few eye rolls, maybe a smile or two, or maybe you're actually laughing right now. Irregardless, it is good for us to just spend some time in these moments. It's a good strategy to kind of just laugh, kind of poke fun at ourselves a little bit. I think that's important. And what I find interesting is we're here in the Gospel of Mark this morning. And the Gospel of Mark is essentially, it's a biography of Jesus from, of course, the perspective of John Mark. John Mark wrote this, and he has some sources, of course, like all biographies would have. And so for Mark, he spends a lot of time with Peter. And so the Apostle Peter actually gives him a lot of information regarding this. We're going to talk just briefly at the end here of our time together about some other sources he had as well, that just, again, increase the credibility for the story and its historical accuracy, but also it just gives him a little more credence as well. But I love Mark's account because it's very to the point, but he does a great job when he writes this of kind of bringing some very things to the forefront. And one of the things he brings out is this, it's kind of an ironic thing in regards to, there are these people who follow Jesus, and we've watched them do this for months now. They're following Jesus. They've seen him, turn water into wine. They've seen him heal sicknesses that no one else could heal. They've seen him, go toe to toe with these religious leaders who are corrupt, and he goes toe to toe with them to help those who are being taken advantage of. We saw him last week. We saw him go into the temple, and this is not just this is insane what he does. He goes in and he just he chases everyone out of the temple, because it's a corrupt thing that's taking advantage of specifically the poor and the orphan and their need to try to connect with God, and they're exploiting them towards these ends, right? And he comes in and he turns, and they've watched him do every one of these things, and they still don't get it. It's just laced with this irony of, how are you missing this? Like how? Like it's impossible, right? I mean, and what's interesting is today, as we've already read a little bit this morning, and we'll talk about even further, Jesus makes these predictions 3 different times, at least publicly. Hey, listen, I'm going to be arrested. This is part of the plan. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to die. I'm going to be buried, but I'm going to rise again after 3 days. He's made these statements to the disciples. And when he dies, they're surprised. When he's arrested, they run. When he dies, they're surprised. When he rises again, they're nowhere to be found because they don't expect it, right? They just miss it. But I love what it brings out for us too. But listen to the words of this guy. His name is Richard Hayes. He says this. He says, God's manner of revelation is characterized by the hiddenness, reversal, and surprise. Those who follow Jesus find themselves repeatedly failing to understand the will of God. Therefore, there can be no place for smugness or dogmatism. If our sensibilities are formed by this narrative, we will learn not to take ourselves too seriously. We will be very self-critical and receptive to unexpected manifestations of God's love and power. I'm not sure where you're at on your journey with Jesus this morning. Maybe this is kind of new for you and you're kind of exploring this for maybe the first time, or it's really new still. Or maybe you've been doing this for a long time. But wherever you land on that, Mark's gospel, his biography, is extremely good news for us. Because we too often as well miss the point. We miss it. I can't tell you the unimaginable times that I have been pressed in, even just moments like this where I'm going, God, where are you? And the pandemic that's taking place, the worry, the angst, all the things that I'm feeling. And yet I when I look back on my life, I see God. He's never left me. He's never forsaken me. It doesn't mean everything's been easy. It's not been sunshine and rainbows, right? But the reality is he's never left me. So why am I worried now, right? I miss it. I miss the point. It's so easy for me to just miss it. And the reality is, no matter how all the religious activity we have or have not done will really never help us understand what God is doing. Instead, what it takes, according to Mark's gospel here, and as we kind of peer into this morning, what it takes is a humble heart ready to receive, a humble heart who understands they're blind and ready to receive their sight again. And I think for us this morning, as we kind of lean in, as Bryant was talking about last week, as we lean into these moments, may God open our eyes this morning. May he open our eyes to the truth and help us to see who he is, and may much be made of him. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your grace and mercy, and we're so grateful for how you love us. And I think about the craziness that is going on around us, and I think about the reality, though, that you're right here with us, that you're not yelling from your yacht. We're all in this together. You're right here in the midst of it with us, on our boat with us, loving us through this. And God, I pray that this morning you would give us eyes to see and ears to hear the truth. I trust you that your word this morning, as it is given, you will do with it what you will. And I trust you with that, and I lay these things at your feet, trusting you. Thank you for the truth of both your life, your death, and your resurrection. Jesus, we love you. It's in his name we pray. Amen. So let's go here to our passage. I know we've read it already, but let's just kind of peek in here a little bit, starting in verse 33. So Mark chapter 15, starting in verse 33, it says this, "And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, 'My God, why have you forsaken me?' And some of the bystanders hearing it said, 'Behold, he is calling Elijah.' And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, 'Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down.' And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last." So this idea of darkness, the first point that really kind of we need to pull out this morning is this idea of why Jesus came. And it's this idea to defeat darkness. And what we see here in Mark's account specifically, he really hones in on this idea of darkness. So as it says here, the 6th hour, the 6th hour to the 9th hour. So to put that in perspective, because that's weird for us to think about in our time, we don't, on our watch, it doesn't tell us what that means. So this is from noon to 3 p.m. So it was about noon here when the darkness started, and about 3 p.m. it went all the way through that, and that's about the time that Jesus breathes his last breath. So he dies about 3 p.m. according to Mark's account. But what we see is this idea of this darkness. And Josephus, he kind of points to this idea of the nightly sacrifices that would be made were at 3 p.m. So they would have different sacrifices throughout the day, and this was a sacrifice that they would make at the evening sacrifice, would have been about 3 p.m. So about this time, though, there comes this extreme amount of darkness that kind of pervades over at least their scene anyways. And some would say, well, was this like a solar eclipse? And so, but looking at it, this is the Passover week. And so according to all of the calendars and the people that are way smarter than me, they've said that essentially Passover week there was a full moon then. So it couldn't have been a solar eclipse because those happen during new moons, right? So the reality would be this was something that supernaturally takes place. Now, we don't really know why, and we're not really given reasons, but I just want to pontificate with you for a minute about a couple of reasons why I think maybe this was. Perhaps this is about the sadness that God feels as he's watching his own son tortured and murdered and suffering. Maybe that's what it is. Or perhaps this is a judgment that God has, where he wants to dole out judgment to the people who are doing these unspeakable things to his son. And this is where I kind of land on this. I don't know if this is true or not, but this is just kind of where, as I've just thought about this more, perhaps the darkness is a symbol for what Jesus was feeling in this moment. The complete separation from both his friends and his father. That he was totally and utterly alone. I don't know if you've ever felt like that. There's a story as I was preparing for this morning about a guy named Ernest Shackleton. This is an insanely great story, and what I'm going to share with you this morning is just a little bit of it. I would encourage you, go watch the biographies on it. Go read a biography about Shackleton, and it's the heroics that take place, and the person and leader that Shackleton is, especially in the midst of, well, when everything goes wrong, Shackleton's the guy you want because he's just an incredible leader through this. But so Shackleton had a desire in his heart. He wanted to be a polar explorer. And so he had already been on multiple explorations, but had never been the one to accomplish it first. So he'd been to South Pole, but he wasn't there first. And so his goal was to do something that had never been done. And in his estimation, the only thing that was left was to actually traverse across the entire continent of Antarctica. That's the only thing that had not yet been done. It's roughly about 1,000 nautical miles, as I understand it. So he and 27 other men that he handpicked, they go on this journey on the boat, the Endurance. And as they head there, it's roughly, it's in October of 1914. And as they head there, about January, which is, by the way, this is the summertime, okay, for Antarctica. It's the way the polar caps work. And so essentially the summertime is roughly September through April, mid to late April. And so you have a lot of sun then, and obviously there's less ice, right? So they're traversing their way. It's slow going though, because it's a little colder summer than normal. And they encounter in January, they get stuck. They're actually only about 400 yards from open waters, but they get stuck and they can't, no matter how hard they dig, they can't get out. And they spend 9 months stuck in the ice. They do their best. I mean, again, talk about a leader being able to keep the morale of his people, and they're able to continue to go. But late October, the ship starts to spring leaks to where they have to eventually abandon ship. And so they get off the ship, and about November is when it finally gives way and actually is completely crushed by the pressure of the ice itself. But as they're there, they decide, okay, let's do this. There's about 346 miles or so away from us, there is an abandoned outpost depot. We can go there and kind of wait this out, and then we can get, once the ice clears out, then we can get free. At least we'll have some warmth and some shelter and some other things available to us. But they're unable to get there because the ice is just too high. It's too difficult to take all their, they have to take the ships with them. Those are heavy, and to get them there, they just can't make it. And so they spend the next 6 months waiting out the ice. Their goal is, once the ice breaks free, for them to actually get in the water and get across to a neighboring island. So they would actually be on dry land for the first time in like 15 or 16 months at that point. But their goal was to get there, and then from there they could actually get to they could actually then find a whaling station, which was about 800 miles away. They would take one of the boats and go to the whaling station and make their way to safety and rescue the rest. The captain famously kind of said this. He said, "I don't know why people imagine hell to be a place that is hot, instead of a realm as cold as the ice which seemed to likely become our grave." What I find so interesting about this is they were encountering some intensely cold temperatures, and on top of that, just insanely weird environment, right? They're on ice, they're on dry land. That has to be different, and they're slowly moving. So the feeling of that had to have been interesting. But that wasn't the worst part that they encountered. It was actually the darkness. So again, I talked to you about the summertime. Well, when you hit about mid-May, when you hit the winter times, starting in roughly about April, it starts to be you have an average about 17 hours a day of darkness, okay? But from mid-May through the end of July, it's completely dark all the time. The polar night is always there. So no matter how many fires you tried to burn, no matter how many light lanterns you tried to have, it still was just the darkness pervaded you, and the darkness persisted. One explorer says this regarding these long polar nights. The long night affects the human circadian rhythms, which are physical, mental, and behavioral. Your hormones go haywire because they don't know how to react because of the lack of sun and the lack of light in conditions such as those. Tim Keller, he's talking about this specific situation. He talks about the darkness that they experienced on Shackleton's journey. And here's what he says. He says, "In such deep darkness, you can't see forward. So you don't know where you are going. You have no direction. You can't even see yourself. You might as well have no identity. You can't tell if anyone is around you, friend or foe. You are totally isolated." So when we think of this idea of Jesus defeating the darkness, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because when we think of darkness, specifically in the form of evil, we often think of like external sources, right? Like governments, bad guys, Nazis, racists, corporations, cabals, and the list goes on and on and on. And that's kind of what the guys in Jesus' day kind of thought too. There was going to be a guy who would come someday, and he was going to be this incredible hero who was going to rescue them from the occupying evil empire, the Romans, and he would set them free. And in fact, there had been multiple attempts at this, but every single one of them had failed. This was prior to Jesus' time, and it would even happen afterwards, and they never were able to free themselves because that was not the point. They had been expecting a physical freedom, a physical breaking of darkness, but it was actually something altogether different. Jesus was speaking about darkness in another way. He was referring to darkness of the human heart. So the place from where those organizations we mentioned moments ago, the evil that was in their hearts is the same darkness that also exists in people like us. Which I know it's kind of hard to hear, but stay with me on this because the Bible talks a lot about darkness. It talks a lot about specifically the darkness of the human heart. And much like the darkness disoriented those sailors many years ago, the darkness in our hearts also does the same thing. It keeps us from going to true north. And the way kind of the Bible describes the human darkness and really how we place it and what it looks like is more this. It's a decision that we place where we place something or someone as more important than God. And so what happens is we traverse this life and we go after that goal, whatever it is that we've put there as more important at the center of our world. That's more important, whether it be career, whether it be success, whether it be family, whether it be love, whether it be money. Which, by the way, guys, those are all good things. But they are merely gifts from God. And so the reality is we put the created above the creator. What happens is we head down that pathway and we continually get off course. It sends us away from the things we're actually pursuing inside of those things. And we've seen this, right? I mean, how many families have been sacrificed on the altar of career, right? We may have watched friends sacrifice relationships and things and even self on the altar of getting just a little more of that money to add to their bank account. And it's easy for us to look at them and say, oh man, look what they're doing. They're wasting their life. But what about us? isn't there something there for us too, where we can easily put, and I don't know what it is for you, I have mine as well, where we put these created things above Creator. And what happens is those things slowly and surely become our identity. The unfortunate part about it is those things are fragile. They're insecure. And they cannot hold up against the weight of human approval. They can't hold up against the weight of just the world. And so that created thing starts to crumble. And what happens for us is we slowly but surely lose our identity. And we descend into this chasm, this crumbling world of identity around us, to where we are literally alone. We start to isolate ourselves even from other people. Perhaps that's because of our anger, perhaps that's because of our pride, perhaps that's because of our shame. And we feel totally and completely lost and separated. And maybe this morning you're right there. Like you're literally trying to climb out of the rubble that is your identity. You're going, I don't even know who I am this morning. And maybe it's because of this quarantine, like it's descended you into this place that you don't really like, and you're like, where am I going? Or maybe it's a relationship, or maybe again it's that career or the success or whatever the thing you were pursuing, and it crumbled right before you, and you're going, where am I going? I am lost. And that's how we all feel, right? Because that's exactly where we head when we head down this pathway, and we feel completely lost and separated. But the beautiful part about it is the story that we're reading this morning tells us it's not over yet, that it's not completely lost yet. And so here we see Jesus, and he cries out of the darkness. And the question for us this morning is, have you ever felt truly alone? Have you ever felt like God has left you? Maybe again, like I talked about, you're climbing out of the rubble. That is that identity that has crumbled before you, and you just have a semblance of loneliness, and you don't even know if God's with you in this moment. Well, here at this moment, Jesus approaches uncharted territory. Because you and I, as we experience loneliness in a human way, we still have around us the boundless presence of God's grace. It still abounds in this world, even when we feel alone, even when we feel like we're not quite there yet. Because as the psalmist declares, there's no place we can go away from God's presence. Nowhere. Even our friend Shackleton that we talked about just moments ago, even he truly did not know what it was like to be fully alone or even left by God. Now, I know if you're like me, as I share that story, you're like, man, where are you? Like, why didn't you share the end of it? So let me tell you what happened to these 28 men. Okay, so they get, the ice eventually breaks about 6 months later. So they've spent about 15 to 16 months away from family, away from everything, and they're on this ice, and the ice finally breaks, and they get into their 3 lifeboats that are roughly about 20 plus feet long. They're open though, because you can imagine the water is deathly cold, and they traverse these storms, and it takes them 7 days to get to the island that isn't very far away. If you want to know more about that, go read some of the stories of heroicism that take place in those moments. And so they land there. Many of them are sick, and there's no way they can go on. And so Shackleton, being the leader he is, he takes 5 other guys with him, and they get into one of those boats, and they know they're 800 miles from rescue. There's a whaling outpost on the South Georgian Island, and so they get into their boat and they head that way. It takes them roughly about 16 days to make it, and when they land, they realize they're on the wrong side of the island. I mean, just the worst gets worse, right? 3 of them can't go further, and so Shackleton and 2 other guys, they actually go their way. Now, this isn't Kansas, guys. Like, this isn't flat land where they just have to go, so many miles, and it's a few hills here and there. These are literally, there are mountains this guy has to climb. He has an axe and some rope. I mean, he's not prepared to climb mountains, okay? He just wasn't. They weren't prepared for all of this, and so, but they do it. They head their way, and they make it. It takes them roughly about 38 hours to in the exposed air and in the cold, but they make it there to the whaling outpost. And it takes them a little while to get the right kind of boat to break through the ice to get to their friends on Elephant Island. But every single one of those men were rescued. It's incredible. One of the things that I found so interesting, though, as they were enduring this darkness, as they were enduring, specifically those three men, as they made their way to the last bit of rescue, right? Those last 36 hours or so, they talk about, as they were headed their way, they were talked about this other person who seemed to be with them. It's kind of eerie and kind of different, right? And as a Christian, I obviously have my bias as far as who I think was with them. Maybe you do too. But this is something where they talk about this, and it's I don't know that they can really describe it as a hallucination, but they literally they said that there was a fourth person that was with them, guiding them along the path. Shackleton didn't know what it was truly like to be alone. I mean, even then, at least he had his buddies with him, right? And perhaps even this fourth person that was with him. But Jesus, like an explorer with the good of heaven's country in mind, sets out on a journey where he will both be abandoned by all his closest friends and feel as though his Father has left him too. Hanging on that cross with the physical agony from both the whips and the nails piercing his hands and feet, the mental agony from the words of those mocking him, the spiritual agony of bearing the weight of the world's sins on his shoulders, and even the emotional agony of feeling completely alone and left by his own God, isolated from humanity and God. This was done for a purpose. He hung on that cross for you and I. That's the point. That's why he did that. And so what happens next is this incredible moment, and we'll read it here in verse 38. And it says, "And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom." Here's what took place. In the temple, there were a bunch of different walls in the temple. And so there was a wall, obviously, to keep people out, right? Or to keep the world outside separated from what was inside. But then there were even walls to separate Gentiles, those who were non-Jews, but they wanted to believe. They were separated from others. And there was a wall that separated men from women. And then there was this wall that separated everyone else from this place called the Holy of Holies, where God's presence resided on the earth, as they understood it. And so there was this curtain. Now, when I think about curtains, I think about the curtains of my house where light can bleed through, and where there's sometimes maybe there's a little sliver, they're not quite pulled all the way together, so I can see outside little moments of what's going on outside. But this was more of like a wall. It was so dark and so thick that there was nothing could get in or out very easily. And in fact, only one human being could go into the Holy of Holies once a year. And they had to be the most spiritual, the most prepared. They had to have the right clothing. They had to have the right washing rituals. I mean, they had to be pristine spiritually. And they would go in, and it was to offer a sacrifice for the entire Jewish population, called the Day of Atonement. When we talk about this idea of spiritual darkness, we talked about it isolating us from each other, but one of the other things the Bible refers to is the separation between us and God. From Adam and Eve being thrown out of the garden when they committed the first sin, to all the way to the judgment, what we find is, since sin has been in existence, so has the chasm of separation. And there's just been, you can imagine, this chasm between us and God, and nothing can get us there. We can't build the right amount of bridges. We can't have the right vehicle to get us there. There is nothing that gets us across the chasm. Nothing can cross it, because it's not good enough. And so even our best attempts find us falling into the chasm where we cannot get to God, because we're so separated from him. The trajectory of our life then without God and in the separation leads us to our end, leads us to our destruction. Listen to the words of Isaiah. "Behold, the day of the Lord comes with wrath and fierce anger." This is stuff we don't like to hear about, right? But we need to hear about it. To make the land a desolation, to destroy its sinners from it. And I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp and the arrogant, and lay low the pompous pride, of the ruthless. Isaiah 13:9 and 11. This separation pervades our hearts to where we are utterly separated. But here's the good news to this, guys, is that God didn't just leave us there, right? He crossed the chasm for us. Even in the garden, when Adam and Eve have made the sin, and when God is judging Adam and Eve and Satan in the form of a snake, God whispers a promise about a day when there would be a God-man who would live and defeat the snake. And this that we're reading about this morning, this is the day. This is why Jesus went to the cross, so that we wouldn't have to. This is why Jesus went to the cross, so he could make a way for us to God. He died the death we should have. He paid the price. What happens next is insane. Look at verse 39. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he had breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The whole biography of Mark has been asking this question: who is Jesus? Maybe you're asking this question this morning, like, who is Jesus? Like who is he to me? Who is he to the world? Is he just a good guy? Is he just a good teacher? Is he somebody I should listen to? Is he somebody I shouldn't listen to? Was he a racist? Is he a homophobic person? Who is Jesus? Or is he God? Like, who is he? And it's interesting, the person who answers this is the most least likely person to answer this question. I mean, you have these religious leaders who have entire sections of the Bible memorized, and they miss it. You have these disciples who followed him, watching him do miracles, watching him say things that were insane, watching him lead in ways that no one else had led, and they miss it. And some of them now are mocking him, and some of them are running away. And here's this guy, this Roman centurion, making a statement. He's the first one to make this statement. Roman coins at this time had an inscription on it. It said, "Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus." Basically, that means son of God was Caesar. That's really what they were saying. So when he makes this statement, it was extremely dangerous. And this is likely to get you killed. In fact, later in history, we'll see Christians be killed for just saying that there is only God, and his name is Jesus. There's only one God, and his name is Jesus. To say this was very dangerous. But it was Jesus' death that convinced this man who Jesus was. This is a centurion, right? So he's not some guy who just went and got his degree and then got an officer, his officer papers and became a leader of men, right? He was just kind of placed at his post. He wasn't placed there because he had a really good family lineage. This guy was placed there because he worked his way up from the bottom all the way to where he was at this moment, and most of it was killing people. Most of it was in battle, where he won his way up. He was promoted up. He had seen men die, and of course, many of which probably died by his own hand. But what I find interesting is, and this is something that it was in Jesus' death that he's actually convinced of who Jesus is. There's a movie that I was thinking about as I was preparing this, and it's actually The Dark Knight, and it's kind of a weird scenario where you have the Joker, and he makes a statement. He goes, "You want to see who somebody is, you got to see them in their death," and that's a weird movie, great movie, but that's a weird moment. But I do think there's something about it where it just reveals, and this guy is saying this. This is revealing to me who this guy is. I see his character. I see who he is. I see him loving his enemies. Those people nailing things into his hands and his feet. He's forgiving them. I see the way he looks at people as he hangs on that cross lovingly. I'm watching him die, and now I know for sure who he is. The war-hardened soldier's heart was melted by Jesus' death. He would be the first to confess that Jesus is God. He is the Son of God. Now what happens next, as we've already read this morning, is he's taken off of the, there are multiple people watching this take place. Specifically, there's a host of women. And there's also a host of others surrounded. And there's a guy named Joseph of Arimathea. And Joseph he convinces Pilate to take his body off of the cross, and he's allowed to bury him. And he does this in haste because the Sabbath is coming. And there's a whole host of things that take place here. But one of the things I really want to point out here, and we'll further talk about this next week, is the idea of this unexpected resurrection. The people following Jesus, again, had no clue. They had missed it. They forgot that he said, I'm going to rise again. And they weren't expecting him to return. Everyone knew he was dead, knew he had been buried, and they weren't expecting anything to take place. Even the women following in this moment, they weren't expecting that either. It's unexpected. And Mark here gives some very specific people and their names that we'll talk about next week, about even just reasons why the document here is trustworthy, that this resurrection actually did take place. And so next week, I encourage you to come back with us next week as we discuss the beautiful, why the resurrection matters for us and how it plays out in our lives and why it's so important. But one of the things that I want to just press in on this idea is about the cross here as we conclude. Why does the cross matter for us this morning? Like, why should it matter that a guy a couple thousand years ago died on a cross, just like other criminals did? Like, why should it matter? Well, it's in the way that he died, and it's for the reasons he died that really give us the answer. A couple thoughts for you this morning is, we've talked about this already. Do you feel alone this morning? Have you ever felt betrayed? Are you grieving or hurt at this moment? The beauty of the cross is that we have a God who understands the human experience. This isn't the king trading places with a pauper so he knows what it's like to be just a normal guy, right? That's not why Jesus does this. That's not why he trades his deity or he drapes over his deity and puts some things he deserves to the side to become a humble carpenter's son. Right? That's not why he does this. And it's not him waving, we don't have a God who's waving from his yacht of luxury. Hey guys, we're all in this together. We're hanging out over here, not sure, the storms are coming. We're on this little bitty skiff, and there's no way we're going to survive this. And he's over in his yacht where he can invite us over too. That's not what's taking place. This is Jesus. He gets in the water with us. He rode on the same boat that we're riding on. He's been through these waters before, and you and I have a God who is willing to go through that for us. But furthermore, when we go through those things, we have someone who understands. We have a God who gets it. When we don't get it, when we forget. And I don't know if you've ever been in the midst of suffering. Maybe you're going through that now. Maybe there's something in your life where you're going through that. And, as part of the idea of suffering, one of the things we try to do is as best we can, and everybody's suffering looks different, and everybody's grief through that looks different, but we're always trying to make sense of why? Why am I going through this? What have I done? We try to make sense of it. And I'm not sure that I'm not going to try to make sense of it this morning, but one of the things I want to point out is something that a guy named Tim Keller said, and here's what he said. It may seem senseless to you, your suffering. Just as Jesus' suffering seemed simplest to the disciples too. They didn't understand why he would have to go through this. But here's what the cross tells us. The cross tells you what the reason isn't. The reason that you're going through these moments is not, here's the thing, it can't be that God doesn't love you. It can't be that he has no plan for you. It can't be that he has abandoned you. Jesus was abandoned, and he paid for our sins so that God the Father would never abandon you. The cross proves that he loves you and understands what it means to suffer. So why the cross matters? Because it matters because we have a God who understands what we're going through, because he went through it for us. The cross matters because he did that so that we could now have access to God. That we could go into the Holy of Holies, because that big curtain was rent in two at that moment when he died on that cross, and he then bridged the gap. He bridged the chasm that was between us and God, the separation between us and God. And he said, you can ride on my back. I will get you there. So as we conclude this morning, And a couple things we need to ask. Number one, who do you say Jesus is? A couple ways you can respond to this on our connection card. I mentioned that earlier at the beginning here regarding ways you can communicate with us. And maybe you've got questions about who Jesus is. Maybe you've got questions about how you can have that relationship with God and understand how Jesus can become your Savior. And so there's some ways for you to communicate that. Or maybe you're at this place where you're not ready to really talk too much about that. You got some questions and you want to talk further about that. Let me encourage you to come back next week as we talk further about the resurrection. We really lean into why it's so important. And the second thought is this: for those of us who have a relationship with God, does the cross have implications for your life? In these moments, do you find hope, or are you like the rest of us where you're just, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to respond, right? Like the cross should have meaning for us in the midst of every situation, every circumstance, knowing we have a God who's right there in the water with us, who's enduring the storms with us. Does it give you hope to know that? Are you remembering again the truth that Jesus both lived, he died, and he rose again for you and I? That it's actually in that remembrance where we put our trust once again in Christ, living out the gospel and encourage us to live the way that he lives. And so again, there's ways for you to communicate that. I want to encourage you wherever you're at in your journey with Jesus, there's ways for you to respond this morning. Perhaps it's, I want to have a relationship with God. Perhaps it's, I've got questions. Perhaps it's, hey, I want to learn how to follow Jesus more. I want to get connected to gospel life. Whatever the case may be, let me encourage you to respond on your connection card in that way to let us know. Or maybe you've just got some stuff you need us to pray about. There's ways for you to communicate that as well. But at the end of the day, know this, that you have a God who went through all of that for you. And for whatever crazy reason, he did it for me too, right? Like it's insane to think that he would do that. But the other part about that is that's why Gospel Life is here to help walk through that journey with you. Hope you have a great rest of your Easter. I'm going to pray here and then we'll conclude. God, we thank you for your grace and mercy. We do ask in your grace and mercy that you would just do a work in our hearts as we consider these things this morning. We love you and we're so grateful for your son, Jesus, who is our hope. I do pray for those of us who are watching this morning who are, they're having a hard time. It's a difficult thing and they're going through difficult moments. And God, I pray that you would just meet them right where they're at. Father, I ask that you would just do an extreme work in our hearts this week. I pray, Father, that the true story of the Easter story, your life, your death, and your resurrection would take full meaning in our hearts this week. I pray, Father, that there may be those who are thinking about, man, I want to have a relationship with God through Jesus, that they would be bold and have courage enough to reach out and start to pursue those ends. And God, I pray that you'd meet them right where they're at, in their questions and in those moments. And I pray for those who are struggling too, God, I pray you'd meet them there as well. God, to know that you, who was abandoned, have not abandoned us is an incredible thing. And God, that's where we find our hope this morning. We thank you for your son, Jesus, who is our hope, both in this life and in the next. It's in his name we pray, amen. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Hey, thank you for joining us on this Easter Sunday. Hope you enjoyed the message. Hope it was life-changing for you. Thanks for tuning in this weird season that we find ourselves in, gathering online. If you could, go ahead and fill out a connection card for us. That will be at glcwichita.com/connect. If you fill that out for us, we would greatly appreciate it. You will actually receive a gift card, and we will make a small donation of, I believe, $5 to help relieve people in need during COVID-19. And just go ahead and fill that out, and you can find a way to request prayers, get more information on the church, and we love to know who was with us, who joined us on this Sunday. And then also on April 26th, we will be introducing a few new elements into our service. So go ahead and stay tuned into our Facebook page, be a part of that, and to stay connected to figure out exactly what we're doing, and if you want to be a part of it. Hey, thank you for joining us once again. God bless and stay healthy. Thanks.